Amara Dubois always believed her love for Leo Vance was strong enough to overcome any obstacle. She was a trial lawyer used to facing giants. He was the heir to an empire, yet he had a kind heart. Walking down the cold hallway to Victoria Vance's office, she had braced herself for a chilly reception. But she could never have prepared for the words she was about to hear through the heavy oak door. "You are not having kids with that black woman." His mother's cruel words were more than just an insult. They were a mystery. Why would a woman as powerful as Victoria resort to such a crude weapon? Behind that blatant racism, could there be a brutal test or a larger conspiracy threatening to devour everything? Before we uncover the truth, let us know where you're watching from. If you believe in the power of resilience, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Share in the comments. Have you ever had to face prejudice to protect someone you love? Now let's return to New York. The late summer air hung heavy in Amara Dubois' Brooklyn apartment, a soft hum of jazz weaving through the open windows. The living room glowed under the flicker of candles, their amber light dancing across the walls, casting shadows that seemed to sway to the rhythm of Ella Fitzgerald's voice. Amara leaned against the kitchen counter, her white blouse slightly untucked after a long day, her fingers tracing the rim of a wine glass. Across from her, Leo Vance sat on the couch, his tie loosened, a boyish grin spreading across his face as he recounted a story from his day at the Vance Foundation. His enthusiasm was infectious, his hands gesturing wildly as he described a new literacy program for underserved kids. Amara couldn't help but smile, her heart swelling at the sight of him, so different from the cold, cutthroat world of Vance Media Group he was born into. They were an unlikely pair. Amara, a litigation lawyer for a nonprofit, spent her days battling corporate giants in courtrooms, her sharp mind slicing through their defenses like a blade. Leo, the sole heir to VMG's empire, could have been just another spoiled scion, but he wasn't. He poured his soul into the foundation, funding schools, shelters, and clinics, driven by a quiet idealism that matched her own. Their worlds, hers rooted in justice, his in privilege, collided a year ago at a charity auction, where a shared glance over a heated bidding war for a painting sparked something neither could ignore. Now here they were, building a life together, or at least trying to. "Amara," Leo said, his voice softening as he set his glass down, "I've been thinking." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his green eyes catching the candlelight. "I want to tell my mother about us, everything, the real stuff, our plans, our future." He paused, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of a cushion, including the part about starting a family. Amara's breath caught. She set her glass down, the clink against the counter louder than she intended. A family. The word carried weight, a promise of something permanent, something she'd always wanted but hadn't dared voice until recently. She crossed the room, settling beside him, her hand finding his. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with caution. "Your mother, she's not exactly the warm and fuzzy type." Leo chuckled, but it was tinged with unease. That's putting it mildly. Victoria Vance, the steel queen of New York's media world, was a legend. A widow who'd transformed VMG into a titan after her husband's death. She was as ruthless as she was brilliant. Her name, synonymous with power and control. Amara had heard the stories, how Victoria could silence a boardroom with a single glance, how she'd crushed competitors without blinking. The thought of facing her, of laying bare their love and dreams, sent a shiver down Amara's spine. But she wasn't one to back down, not in court, not in life. "I'm sure," Leo said, squeezing her hand. "She needs to know you're not just some fling. You're my future." His voice was firm now, the hesitation gone. Amara felt a rush of warmth, but it was tempered by a nagging doubt. She'd faced hostile judges and corporate lawyers, but Victoria Vance was a different kind of adversary. They spent the evening dreaming aloud. Names for a child they hadn't yet conceived, a house outside the city with a garden, a life where their love could breathe free from the weight of expectations. Amara let herself sink into the vision, her head resting on Leo's shoulder as the jazz faded into the night. For a moment the world felt perfect, their love a fortress nothing could breach. Then the phone rang. Leo glanced at the screen, his smile faltering. "It's her," he muttered, picking up the call. Amara watched as he stood pacing toward the window, his voice low but tense. "Yes, Mother. No, I haven't forgotten the gala. I'll be there." A pause, then his shoulders stiffened. "There's someone I want you to meet." Amara couldn't hear Victoria's response, but the air in the room shifted, growing heavier. Leo's jaw tightened as he listened, his free hand clenching into a fist. "Her name's Amara Dubois," he said, his tone defiant. "She's a lawyer, works for a nonprofit, and she's important to me." Another pause, longer this time. Then in a voice that sent a chill through Amara's bones, Victoria spoke loud enough for her to catch every word through the phone's speaker. "I've heard about your little lawyer friend. Bring her to the gala this weekend. I want to see what kind of woman thinks she can keep up with a Vance." Leo ended the call, his face pale. He turned to Amara, forcing a smile. "Well, that's step one," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Amara stood, crossing her arms, her mind already racing. She'd faced worse than a disapproving mother, or so she told herself. But the cold edge in Victoria's voice lingered, like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. As they cleaned up the dishes in silence, Amara's thoughts churned. She wasn't naive. She knew the world Leo came from, a world of wealth and power where people like her, black, middle class, uncompromising, were often seen as outsiders. She'd fought her way through courtrooms and boardrooms, proving her worth time and again. But this was different. This wasn't just about her. It was about them, their future, their child. She glanced at Leo, his head bowed as he scrubbed a plate, and felt a surge of resolve. Whatever Victoria Vance threw at her, she'd face it head on, for Leo, for them. The candles burned low, their flames flickering as if sensing the tension to come. Outside, the city hummed, oblivious to the storm brewing in their lives. Amara reached for Leo's hand, her grip firm. "We'll get through this," she said, her voice a quiet vow. Leo nodded, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. As the night closed in, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that the gala would be more than a meeting. It would be a battle. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered under a cascade of chandeliers, their light reflecting off polished marble floors and the gleaming flutes of champagne passed by white-gloved waiters. The Key Vance Gala was a spectacle of New York's elite, media moguls, politicians, and philanthropists mingling in a carefully choreographed dance of power and prestige. Amara Dubois stood at the edge of the room, her white silk gown catching the light as she scanned the crowd. Beside her, Leo Vance adjusted his tie, his fingers betraying a slight tremor. The weight of his mother's call from a few nights ago lingered between them, a silent undercurrent to the evening's glamour. Amara squeezed his arm, her touch a reminder of their shared resolve. "We've got this," she whispered, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Leo managed a smile, but his eyes darted toward the center of the room where Victoria Vance held court. The Steel Queen moved with the grace of a predator, her tailored black dress cutting a sharp silhouette against the sea of color. She greeted guests with a practiced smile, her words clipped and precise, every gesture calculated. Amara felt the air shift as Victoria's gaze landed on them. "Here we go," Leo murmured, leading Amara forward. The introduction was brief, almost clinical. "Mother, "This is Amara Dubois," Leo said, his voice firm but tinged with nerves. Victoria's eyes, sharp as cut glass, swept over Amara, taking in every detail without a flicker of warmth. "The lawyer," she said, her tone neutral, but laced with something that made Amara's skin prickle. "Welcome to our little event. I trust you're finding it enlightening?" Her smile was a blade, thin and dangerous. Amara met her gaze, refusing to flinch. "It's impressive," she replied, her voice smooth. "The foundation does important work. Leo's told me about the new literacy programs." She kept her words deliberate, a subtle challenge to Victoria's unspoken dismissal. For a moment, something like amusement flashed in Victoria's eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it came. The evening wore on, and Victoria's hospitality revealed its thorns. She steered Amara toward a group of conservative politicians, men Amara recognized from her courtroom battles against policies that crushed the vulnerable. "I thought you'd enjoy meeting Senator Hargrove," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "He's quite vocal about law and order. You two must have so much to discuss." The senator's handshake was limp, his smile patronizing as he launched into a lecture about frivolous lawsuits clogging the system. Amara bit back a retort, her jaw tight as she navigated his barbs, all while Victoria watched from a distance, her expression unreadable. Later, as Leo was pulled into a conversation with donors, Victoria struck again. She approached Amara at the dessert table, where crystal bowls overflowed with raspberries and cream. "You're quite the idealist, aren't you?" Victoria said, her voice low, almost conversational. "Fighting for the little people, taking on corporations like mine. It's charming, in a naive sort of way." She picked up a spoon, twirling it absently. "But this world, our world, requires more than good intentions. It demands strength, sacrifice." Amara's fingers tightened around her glass. "I've faced worse than skepticism," she said, her tone even but edged with steel. "My work isn't about naivety. It's about accountability, even for companies like VMG." The words hung between them, a quiet gauntlet thrown down. Victoria's lips curved, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Bold," she said. "But boldness can be a liability when you're climbing a ladder you don't understand." Before Amara could respond, Victoria was called away by a board member, leaving her words to fester. Amara stood alone for a moment, the chatter and clinking glasses fading into a dull roar. She wasn't a stranger to hostility. She'd faced it in courtrooms, in boardrooms, in the subtle sneers of those who underestimated her. But this was different. Victoria's disdain wasn't just personal. It felt like a test, one Amara wasn't sure she was passing. Leo found her near the balcony, the city skyline sprawling beyond the glass doors. "I saw you with Mother," he said, his voice tight. "What did she say?" Amara hesitated, then recounted the exchange, softening the edges but not the sting. Leo's face darkened. "She's always like this, controlling, impossible. I'll talk to her." But Amara caught the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the same uncertainty she'd seen when Victoria's call had interrupted their evening. As they rejoined the crowd, Victoria's voice cut through the noise, summoning Amara to a quieter corner near the stage. The room seemed to hush, as if sensing the tension. "Miss Dubois," Victoria said, her tone deceptively soft, "Ergite's ambition is a fine quality. But be certain you know which tree you're climbing. The Vance name isn't for opportunists to tarnish." The words were a slap, delivered with the precision of someone who knew exactly how to wound. Amara's pulse raced, but she held her ground, her eyes locked on Victoria's. "I'm not here for your name," she said, her voice low but unwavering. "I'm here for Leo, and for what we're building together." Victoria's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture, a slight tilt of the head, as if reassessing her opponent. Before she could reply, a guest interrupted, pulling her back into the fray. Amara exhaled, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed her gown. The night had been a battlefield, and she'd survived the first skirmish. But as she watched Victoria glide through the crowd, Amara knew this was only the beginning. On the drive home, the city lights blurred past, a stark contrast to the silence between her and Leo. He reached for her hand, but his grip felt tentative, as if he were holding on to something he wasn't sure he could keep. "We'll get through this," Amara said, echoing her words from nights before, but the conviction felt harder to summon. The gala had exposed the fault lines in their world, and Victoria's warning echoed in her mind. As they pulled up to her apartment, Amara glanced at Leo, his profile etched against the glow of the streetlights. She loved him, fiercely, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the real fight was just beginning. The sting of Victoria's words at the gala lingered like a bruise as Amara stepped into her apartment, the door clicking shut behind her and Leo. The city's hum filtered through the windows, but it couldn't drown out the tension that had followed them home. Amara tossed her keys onto the counter, her movements sharp, her mind replaying Victoria's cold warning. The Vance name isn't for opportunists to tarnish. She turned to Leo, who stood by the couch, his shoulders slumped, his usual warmth dimmed. "We need to talk about your mother," she said, her voice firm but fraying at the edges. "That wasn't just a test. That was an attack." Leo rubbed his temples, his jaw tight. "I know," he said, his voice low. "She's always been like this, controlling, impossible. But I'll talk to her, Amara. I promise." His words were earnest, but Amara caught the flicker of hesitation in his eyes, the same doubt she'd seen when Victoria's call had interrupted their evening days ago. She wanted to believe him, but the memory of Victoria's icy stare made her chest tighten. "You can't just talk," she said, stepping closer. "You have to make her understand we're serious, that I'm not going anywhere." Leo nodded, pulling her into a hug, but his embrace felt more like an apology than a reassurance. Days later, the air was thick with anticipation as they prepared for a business lunch at VMG's Manhattan headquarters. Leo had insisted on bringing Amara, a chance to show his mother their unity. The restaurant, perched on the top floor of a sleek skyscraper, buzzed with the city's power players, executives in tailored suits, their laughter sharp and calculated. Amara, in a crisp white blazer and skirt, sat beside Leo, her posture rigid as she scanned the room. Victoria presided at the head of the table, her presence commanding, her smile a polished mask. The other guests, board members and key investors, chatted about stock prices and acquisitions, their voices a low hum of wealth and ambition. The conversation turned to Leo's role in the company, a topic Amara knew was fraught. A silver-haired investor, his voice dripping with condescension, leaned forward. "So, Leo, what's next for the Vance heir? Planning to settle down and carry on the family legacy?" The question was light, but the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Victoria's response. She set her wine glass down with deliberate care, her eyes locking onto Leo's. Then, with a voice that carried across the table, clear and cutting, she said, "You're not having kids with that black woman. Leo knows the value of his legacy. He won't throw it away on a fleeting romance." The words landed like a thunderclap. Amara froze, her fork hovering over her plate, the room blurring around her. The other guests shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes, others exchanging glances. Leo's face drained of color, his mouth opening but no words coming out. Amara's heart pounded, her pride warring with the humiliation burning through her. She wanted to stand, to fire back, but her body felt anchored to the chair, every eye in the room a weight pinning her down. Victoria sipped her wine, her expression serene, as if she hadn't just shattered the air. The lunch dragged on, the conversation resuming with forced normalcy, but Amara barely heard it. Her mind was a storm, anger, shame, and betrayal swirling together. Leo reached for her hand under the table, but she pulled away, her fingers curling into a fist. When the meal ended, she excused herself, her voice steady despite the chaos inside, and slipped into the hallway, needing air, needing space. Leo followed, his face etched with guilt. "Amara, I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't think she'd... I'll fix this." "Fix it?" Amara spun to face him, her eyes blazing. "She humiliated me in front of your entire world, Leo, and you just sat there." Her words cut, and she saw him flinch, but she couldn't stop. "If you can't stand up to her now, what happens when it's not just me, when it's us, our future?" Leo's silence was an answer, heavy and damning. He reached for her again, but she stepped back, her heart aching but resolute. "I need time," she said, turning away, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she walked to the elevator. That evening, alone in her apartment, Amara's phone buzzed with a text from a colleague who'd heard about the lunch from a mutual contact. The news was spreading, a whispered scandal among the city's elite. Amara's hands trembled as she read the message, Victoria's words echoing in her mind. That black woman. It wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration of war, a line drawn between Amara and the life she and Leo were trying to build. She sank onto the couch, her white blouse now crumpled, and stared at the ceiling. She'd faced prejudice before, in courtrooms, in subtle slights. But this was personal, a blade aimed at her heart. Leo called, his voicemails piling up, each one more desperate than the last. "I'm going to confront her, Amara, I swear. Please, just talk to me." But Amara didn't answer. She needed him to act, not plead. As the city lights flickered outside, she felt the weight of her own strength, the resilience that had carried her through countless battles. She loved Leo, but love wasn't enough if he couldn't fight for her. The gala had been a warning. This lunch was a wound. And yet beneath the pain, a spark of defiance flickered. Victoria Vance might think she could break them, but Amara wasn't one to crumble. She stood, smoothing her skirt, her resolve hardening. Whatever came next, she'd face it on her terms. The hum of Brooklyn's streets was a distant murmur as Amara sat at her kitchen table, the glow of her laptop casting sharp shadows across her face. Victoria's words from the lunch, "You're not having kids with that black woman," replayed in her mind like a relentless echo, each syllable a fresh cut. She hadn't spoken to Leo since storming out of the restaurant, his unanswered voicemails piling up like unopened wounds. The apartment, once a haven for their shared dreams, felt suffocating, the silence heavy with the weight of her doubt. Amara's fingers hovered over her phone, tempted to call him, to demand answers, but pride held her back. She'd fought too hard, climbed too far to let anyone, not even Victoria Vance, reduce her to an outsider in her own love story. She pushed the phone aside and opened a case file, hoping work would anchor her, but her focus shattered when an email from her nonprofit's director popped up. An anonymous donor had wired a six-figure sum, saving a critical lawsuit against a mining conglomerate accused of poisoning a rural community's water supply. The timing was uncanny, the amount staggering. Amara's instincts, honed by years of unraveling corporate deceit, kicked into gear. Anonymous donations this large didn't just happen, not when her organization was on the brink of collapse. She leaned back, her mind racing. Could this be a coincidence, or was it something else? Digging into the financial trail, Amara traced the funds through a labyrinth of shell companies, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Hours passed, the city outside fading into a blur of headlights and horns. Then a name surfaced, a defunct subsidiary of Vance Media Group, dormant for years but linked to the transfer. Her pulse quickened. Why would VMG or someone tied to it funnel money to her cause? Victoria's face flashed in her mind, those cold, calculating eyes, that voice dripping with disdain. Was this a bribe? A manipulation? Amara's stomach churned at the thought, but a deeper instinct whispered that there was more to Victoria's game than simple prejudice. She needed answers, but first, she needed Leo. He arrived at her apartment just past midnight, his knock tentative, his face etched with exhaustion. "Amara, please," he said as she opened the door, his voice raw. "I know I failed you at that lunch. I froze, but I'm here now." She stepped aside, letting him in, but kept her arms crossed, her expression guarded. "You didn't just freeze, Leo," she said, her voice low but sharp. "You let her tear me apart in front of everyone. Do you know what that felt like?" Her words hung heavy, and Leo flinched, his hands clenching at his sides. "I'm sorry," he said, stepping closer, but she held up a hand, stopping him. "Sorry isn't enough. I need to know you're in this with me, not just following your mother's script." She turned to her laptop, pulling up the financial records. "And then there's this, a massive donation to my organization tied to a VMG subsidiary. Explain that." Leo's eyes widened, confusion replacing guilt. "I had no idea," he said, scanning the screen. "Mother doesn't share every move with me, but this doesn't make sense. She'd never support your work after what she said." Amara's jaw tightened. "Exactly. So what's her angle?" Leo shook his head, his frustration mirroring hers. "I'll find out," he said, his voice hardening. "I'm going to confront her. Tonight." Amara watched him, searching his face for the resolve she needed to see. It was there, flickering but real. She nodded, her anger softening just enough to let him leave, but the crack in their trust remained. Leo drove to VMG's headquarters, the city's neon glow blurring past as his mind churned. His mother's office was a fortress of glass and steel, her silhouette visible through the window as he entered. Victoria sat behind her desk, a single lamp casting her face in stark relief. "You're late," she said without looking up, her pen scratching across a document. "What's so urgent?" Leo didn't sit. "What game are you playing with Amara?" he demanded, his voice louder than he intended. "First you humiliate her, now you're funneling money to her organization. What are you trying to do?" Victoria set her pen down, her gaze lifting to meet his. For a moment she looked almost weary, the lines on her face deeper than usual. "You're too weak to understand what's happening," she said, her voice low, not cruel but pointed. "Grow up, Leo. The world doesn't run on love and ideals." Her words stung, but they weren't the usual venom. There was something else, an urgency, a challenge. Leo leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of her desk. "If you're testing her or me, stop it. She's not your pawn." Victoria's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "And you think you know her strength?" she said, standing to face him. "You have no idea what's at stake." She turned away, dismissing him, but her words lingered, cryptic and heavy with intent. Back in her apartment, Amara paced, the financial record still open on her screen. Victoria's involvement didn't add up, but it ignited a spark of curiosity beneath her anger. Was this a trap or something else entirely? She thought of Leo, now facing his mother alone, and felt a pang of hope mixed with fear. Their love was aflame, but it was flickering under the weight of Victoria's shadow. As dawn crept over the skyline, Amara sat back down, her resolve hardening. She'd find the truth about the money, about Victoria, about what it would take to keep her and Leo's future intact. The crack in their bond was real, but so was her fight. The dawn light filtered through Amara's apartment windows, casting a pale glow over the papers strewn across her kitchen table. Sleep had eluded her after Leo's departure to confront Victoria, his cryptic recounting of their exchange. "You have no idea what's at stake." looping in her mind. Victoria's words, paired with the mysterious donation linked to a VMG subsidiary, gnawed at her. Amara wasn't one to sit idle. Her years as a litigator had taught her to chase loose threads, and this one felt like a rope leading somewhere dark. She opened her laptop again, the screen's glow sharpening her focus. The anonymous donation was no coincidence. It was a puzzle, and she was determined to solve it. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, diving deeper into the financial trail. The defunct VMG subsidiary led to a web of shell companies, each transaction a carefully veiled step. Hours passed, coffee cups piling up as she uncovered a pattern. Someone was quietly amassing VMG stock through proxies, a stealthy bid for control. The trail ended at a name, Marcus Thorne, a financier with a reputation as a corporate vulture. Amara's pulse quickened. She'd heard of Thorne, a man who thrived on hostile takeovers, his name whispered in legal circles as a predator who left companies gutted. But why VMG? And why now? She dug further, pulling up old articles and financial filings. A decade-old report caught her eye. Thorne had once pitched a partnership to Leo's late father, only to be publicly dismissed as a second-rate opportunist during a VMG board meeting. The humiliation had been brutal. Thorne's name dragged through the financial press. Amara leaned back, the pieces clicking. This wasn't just business, it was personal. Thorne was gunning for VMG to settle a score, and Victoria's hostility, her test, might be more than prejudice. Could she be shielding Leo from a threat she couldn't name outright? Amara's phone buzzed, snapping her from her thoughts. It was Leo, his voice strained. "I didn't get anywhere with Mother," he said. "She's hiding something, Amara. She wouldn't explain the money, just kept saying I need to step up. I'm coming over." Amara glanced at her screen, Thorne's name staring back at her. "Hurry," she said, her tone urgent. "We need to talk." When Leo arrived, his coat damp from a sudden rain, Amara didn't waste time. She turned her laptop toward him, pointing to the evidence of Thorne's stock purchases. "He's after VMG," she said, her voice low but steady. "He's buying up shares through proxies, enough to force a takeover. This isn't random, Leo. He's got a grudge against your family." Leo's face paled as he scanned the documents, his hands gripping the table's edge. "Thorne," he muttered, recognition dawning. "I was a kid when it happened, but I remember my father laughing about him, said he was a nobody trying to play in our league." Amara's eyes narrowed. "He's not a nobody anymore. If he succeeds, everything your mother built, everything you're part of, could collapse." Leo's jaw tightened, a mix of fear and anger flashing across his face. "Why didn't she tell me?" he said, more to himself than to Amara. "She's always kept me in the dark, like I'm not strong enough to handle it." Amara reached for his hand, her touch grounding him. "Maybe she's protecting you," she said, the words surprising even herself. "But that doesn't excuse what she did to me. We need to know her game." Leo nodded, but his eyes were distant, wrestling with the weight of his mother's secrecy and his own hesitation at lunch. Amara felt the crack in their trust widen, but she pushed it aside. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about survival. "I'm going to reach out to some of VMG's smaller shareholders," she said, her mind already mapping a strategy. "If I can convince them to align with us, we might slow Thorne down." Leo looked at her, a flicker of awe breaking through his turmoil. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. "Not after what Mother said." "I'm not doing it for her," Amara replied, her voice firm. "I'm doing it for you, and because I don't let people like Thorne win." She stood, pulling on a white cardigan, her resolve a quiet fire. Over the next 2 days, she worked tirelessly, calling contacts, drafting emails, and meeting with shareholders in discreet coffee shops across the city. Her legal expertise became a weapon, her arguments sharp and persuasive, rallying a coalition of minor investors who distrusted Thorne's motives. Each conversation was a step toward a plan, but also a reminder of the stakes, not just for VMG, but for her and Leo's future. Late one night, as rain lashed against her windows, Amara sat with a cup of tea staring at a photo of her and Leo from happier times. A candid shot at a park, his arm around her, both of them laughing. The memory felt distant, overshadowed by Victoria's cruelty and Thorne's shadow. She wondered if Victoria's hostility was a shield, a way to push her into proving herself against a threat like Thorne. It didn't justify the pain, but it shifted the lens. Amara set the photo down, her mind racing. Thorne was the real enemy, but Victoria's game was still a mystery. As she prepared for the next move, a VMG board meeting loomed, a battlefield where alliances would be tested and secrets exposed. Amara wasn't sure what she'd find, but she knew one thing. She was ready to fight. The conference room at Vance Media Group's headquarters thrummed with tension, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and impending conflict. The board meeting, called with urgent haste, was a high-stakes chessboard, and every player knew it. Victoria Vance sat at the head of the long mahogany table, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning the room like a general before battle. Leo sat to her right, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest, his gaze flickering between his mother and the empty doorway. The board members, seasoned executives and investors, shifted in their seats, their murmurs a low hum of unease. Marcus Thorne's shadow loomed large, his plan to seize control of VMG now an open threat. Amara had spent the past 48 hours in a whirlwind, her days a blur of phone calls and clandestine meetings with VMG's minority shareholders. Her discovery of Thorne's stock purchases had lit a fire under her, and she'd worked tirelessly to rally allies, her legal acumen weaving a net of support to counter his move. She hadn't seen Leo since their tense exchange in her apartment, their connection strained but not broken, her resolve fueled by love and a refusal to let Thorne's vendetta win. Now, as the meeting began, she waited in the hallway, her white suit crisp, her breath steady despite the storm in her chest. Inside, Thorne made his entrance, his presence a jolt of arrogance. He strode to the center of the room, his tailored navy suit a stark contrast to the predatory glint in his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth but edged with menace, "Vance Media Group stands at a crossroads. Under Victoria's leadership, it's grown stagnant, clinging to outdated models." He paused, letting his words sink in, his gaze locking onto Victoria. "I hold a significant share of this company, enough to call for a vote of no confidence. It's time for new blood." He smirked at Leo. "And your lawyer girlfriend won't change the math, Leo. She's out of her depth here." Leo's fists clenched, but Victoria raised a hand, silencing him. Her face was a mask of calm, but her eyes burned with defiance. "You've always been a vulture, Marcus," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "You think you can swoop in and tear apart what I've built? You're mistaken." The board members exchanged glances, some nodding in support, others wavering under Thorne's influence. He leaned forward, undeterred. "The numbers don't lie, Victoria. Your reign is over." The room teetered on the edge of chaos, the vote looming like a guillotine. Leo's jaw tightened, his mind racing with the weight of his mother's legacy and his failure to shield Amara from her cruelty. He opened his mouth to speak, to challenge Thorne, but before he could, the heavy oak doors swung open. All eyes turned as Amara walked in. She moved with purpose, her white suit a beacon in the dimly lit room, her presence commanding silence. In her hand, she held a stack of documents, the result of her relentless work. "I represent a coalition of minority shareholders," she announced, her voice clear and unwavering. "And I'm here to present evidence that Mr. Thorne's acquisition tactics violate federal securities law." The room froze, Thorne's smirk faltering. Amara stepped to the table, laying out the papers with precision. His proxies engaged in undisclosed transactions, manipulating stock prices to force this takeover. I've secured affidavits from shareholders who were coerced into selling. This isn't a legitimate bid. It's a scheme. She met Thorne's gaze, unflinching, as she detailed his violations, her legal arguments razor sharp, dismantling his strategy with surgical precision. The board members leaned forward, some scribbling notes, others exchanging stunned looks. Thorne's composure cracked, his voice rising. "This is preposterous. You have no standing here." But Amara didn't waver. "I have the law," she said, sliding a final document across the table, a proxy agreement signed by her coalition, giving her authority to vote their shares against Thorne. "And I have enough votes to block your motion." The room erupted in murmurs, the tide turning. Victoria's eyes locked onto Amara, a flicker of astonishment breaking through her stoic facade, followed by something else. Respect, grudging but undeniable. Leo stared at Amara, his heart pounding with pride and relief, the crack in their bond mending with every word she spoke. Thorne, cornered, slammed a fist on the table, his face reddening. "This isn't over," he hissed, but his voice lacked conviction. The board chair called for a recess, the vote delayed, as Amara's evidence demanded review. As the room cleared, Leo crossed to Amara, his hand finding hers. "You were incredible," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She squeezed his hand, her eyes still on Thorne as he stormed out. "We're not done yet," she said, her tone resolute. Victoria approached, her steps measured. "Miss Dubois," she said, her voice low, "you've surprised me." It wasn't an apology, but the weight of her words carried something close to admiration. Amara nodded, her expression guarded. "I didn't do this for you," she said, echoing her earlier resolve. "I did it for Leo, and for what's right." As they left the room, the city skyline loomed through the windows, a reminder of the world they were fighting for. Amara had turned the tables, but Thorne's retreat was temporary, and Victoria's motives remained shrouded. The victory was sweet, but fleeting, a moment of triumph in a war far from won. Amara glanced at Leo, his grip on her hand firm now, and felt a surge of determination. Whatever lay ahead, Thorne's next move, Victoria's hidden agenda, she was ready to face it, not as an outsider, but as a force no one could ignore. The echo of Amara's triumph in the boardroom lingered as she stepped out of VMG's headquarters, the city's pulse thrumming beneath her feet. The stunned silence of the board, Marcus Thorne's retreat, and the fleeting respect in Victoria's eyes replayed in her mind, but the victory felt incomplete. Leo walked beside her, his hand brushing hers, his silence heavy with unspoken gratitude. Amara's white suit, still crisp, despite the day's intensity, caught the late afternoon light as they hailed a cab. Thorne's threat was stalled, not stopped, and Victoria's cryptic words from their last confrontation, "You have no idea what's at stake," gnawed at her. Amara needed answers, and she sensed they lay with the woman who'd orchestrated this storm. The next morning, a courier delivered a note to Amara's apartment. The heavy cream paper embossed with VMG's logo. "Meet me at my office, 10 a.m., alone. VV." Amara's jaw tightened as she read it, the memory of Victoria's public humiliation at the lunch still raw. She considered refusing, but curiosity and a flicker of defiance propelled her forward. If Victoria wanted a reckoning, Amara would give her one. The executive floor of VMG was eerily quiet when Amara arrived, the glass walls reflecting her determined stride. Victoria's office was a fortress of minimalist elegance. Sleek furniture, a single orchid on the desk, and floor-to-ceiling windows framing Manhattan's skyline. Victoria stood by the glass, her back to the door, her black dress a stark contrast to the city's chaos below. "Miss Dubois," she said without turning, her voice low but resonant, "thank you for coming." Amara didn't sit, her posture rigid. "I'm here for answers," she said, her tone sharp but controlled. "You humiliated me, played games with my organization's funding, and now you expect me to trust you? Tell me why." Victoria turned, her eyes meeting Amara's, and for the first time, the Steel Queen looked almost human. Her shoulders slightly slumped, her gaze carrying a weight Amara hadn't noticed before. "I owe you an explanation," Victoria said, gesturing to a chair. Amara hesitated, then sat, her hands folded tightly. Victoria remained standing, her fingers tracing the edge of her desk. "What I did at that lunch was unforgivable," she began, her voice steady but softer than Amara expected. "Calling you. What I did in front of everyone was a test. A cruel one, I admit. But I needed to know if you were strong enough to stand beside Leo to protect what our family has built." Amara's eyes narrowed, anger flaring. "A test? You think slandering me proves anything?" Victoria raised a hand, not to dismiss but to pause. "You don't understand," she said. "Marcus Thorne isn't just a businessman. He's a vendetta with a pulse. Years ago, my husband humiliated him, cast him out of our circle. Thorne swore he'd destroy us, and now he's close. I needed to know if the woman Leo loves could face that kind of venom and not break." Amara leaned forward, her voice low and fierce. "You could have trusted me instead of tearing me down. I'm not your pawn." Victoria's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. "No, you're not," she said. "You proved that yesterday. You walked into that boardroom and stopped Thorne cold. I underestimated you, Amara. I won't again." The air between them shifted, the tension easing but not dissolving. Victoria sat, her hands clasped, and her voice took on a confessional tone. "I loved someone once," she said, her eyes distant. "Someone my husband's family deemed unfit, wrong class, wrong connections. They forced me to choose, and I bent. I swore I'd never let Leo face that pain, but I went too far. I used the same tactics I despised to test you, to see if you'd fight for him. You did." Amara's anger softened, not into forgiveness, but into understanding. Victoria wasn't apologizing out of guilt. She was admitting a miscalculation, a rare crack in her armor. "And the donation?" Amara asked, her mind returning to the mysterious funds. Victoria's brow furrowed. "That wasn't me," she said, her tone sharp with surprise. "I assumed you'd traced it to one of my subsidiaries, but I didn't authorize it." Amara's pulse quickened. If not Victoria, then who? The question hung unanswered as Victoria leaned forward. "Thorne's not done," she said. "He'll regroup, come harder. We need you, Amara. Not just for Leo, but for VMG." Amara stood, her resolve hardening. "I'm in this for Leo, and for what's right," she said, echoing her words from the boardroom. "But don't mistake my help for trust. You've got a long way to go to earn that." Victoria nodded, a flicker of respect in her eyes. "Fair enough," she said. "Let's see what you're made of." As Amara left, her mind raced. The donation source was a new mystery, but Victoria's confession had shifted the ground beneath her. She wasn't just fighting for Leo now. She was part of a larger battle, one that pitted her against Thorne's vendetta and Victoria's complex motives. When she met Leo later that day at a quiet cafe, she recounted the meeting, watching his face shift from shock to quiet awe. "She admitted she was wrong," he said, almost disbelieving. "That's unheard of." Amara managed a small smile. "She's not what I thought," she said, "but neither is this fight." As they walked through the city, hand in hand, Amara felt the crack in their bond begin to heal, strengthened by their shared purpose. Thorne's shadow loomed, and the truth behind the donation waited to be uncovered. But for the first time, Amara sensed they were on the same side. not just with Leo, but with the woman who'd once been her enemy. The war was far from over, but Amara was ready for the next move. The aftermath of Victoria's confession left Amara and Leo standing on new ground, their alliance with the Steel Queen, fragile but forged in necessity. Marcus Thorne's retreat from the boardroom had been a temporary victory, his plans to seize VMG stalled, but not defeated. Amara wasted no time, diving into her legal arsenal to solidify their defense. She spent weeks building a case against Thorne, combing through financial records and shareholder testimonies with the precision of a seasoned litigator. Leo, galvanized by her resolve, leveraged his foundation's network to sway public sentiment, exposing Thorne's predatory tactics in discreet leaks to trusted journalists. Victoria, meanwhile, wielded her influence in the boardroom, rallying loyalists to counter Thorne's lingering allies. Together they formed an unlikely triad: Amara's intellect, Leo's heart, and Victoria's cunning, each piece essential to the fight. The breakthrough came late one evening in Amara's apartment, the city's skyline a glittering backdrop to her cluttered desk. A colleague at her nonprofit uncovered a paper trail linking Thorne's proxies to insider trading, a violation that could land him in court. Amara presented the evidence to Victoria and Leo in a tense meeting at VMG's headquarters, her voice steady as she outlined the case. "We can file a federal complaint," she said, sliding a dossier across the table. "This isn't just about saving VMG. It's about holding Thorne accountable." Victoria's eyes scanned the documents, a rare nod of approval breaking her stoic mask. "Do it," she said. Leo reached for Amara's hand, his grip firm, a silent promise that he was with her. The legal battle was swift and brutal. Amara led the charge, her arguments in court dismantling Thorne's empire with surgical precision. By the time the judge ruled in VMG's favor, Thorne's stock holdings were frozen, his reputation in tatters, and a criminal investigation loomed. As he left the courtroom, his once arrogant stride reduced to a shuffle, he shot Amara a venomous glance. She met it unflinchingly, her white blouse a stark contrast to the chaos she'd unleashed. Leo stood beside her, his presence a quiet anchor, while Victoria watched from the back, her expression unreadable but no longer hostile. Months later, the air was softer, the city draped in the golden hues of early autumn. Amara and Leo hosted a small dinner in her Brooklyn apartment, the table set with candles and the jazz records they'd played in simpler times. Victoria arrived, an unexpected but invited guest, her presence less imposing in the intimate setting. The meal was simple: roasted vegetables, grilled chicken, and wine from a bottle Leo had chosen with care. Conversation flowed cautiously at first, the wounds of the past still tender, but Amara felt a shift. Victoria listened as Leo spoke of expanding the Vance Foundation, her usual sharpness softened by something like pride. As dessert was served, slices of peach tart Amara had baked, Leo cleared his throat, his hand finding Amara's under the table. "We have news," he said, his voice steady but brimming with joy. "Amara's pregnant." The words hung in the air, a moment of quiet before Victoria set her fork down, her eyes locking onto Amara's. For a heartbeat, Amara braced for judgment, the echo of "you're not having kids with that black woman" flickering in her memory. But Victoria's face softened, a rare warmth breaking through. She reached across the table, her hand resting on Amara's, the gesture deliberate and unguarded. "This child," Victoria said, her voice low but resonant, "will have your strength, Amara, and Leo's kindness. That's a legacy greater than anything VMG could ever be." Her words were not an apology but a benediction, a recognition of the woman who'd faced her fire and emerged unbroken. Amara nodded, her throat tight, the weight of their shared journey settling into something like peace. Leo squeezed her hand, his eyes bright with tears he didn't bother to hide. The evening wound down, the city's hum a gentle backdrop as Victoria prepared to leave. At the door she paused, turning to Amara. "You've changed us," she said simply, her voice carrying a weight that needed no elaboration. Amara managed a small smile. "We've changed each other," she replied, the words a bridge across their divide. After Victoria left, Amara and Leo stood by the window, the skyline stretching before them. The mystery of the anonymous donation had been solved weeks earlier. A loyal VMG board member, inspired by Amara's defiance, had acted to support her cause, a silent vote of confidence. It was a reminder that their fight had rippled beyond their circle, touching those who'd seen Amara's strength. As Leo wrapped his arms around her, his hand resting gently on her stomach, Amara felt the future take shape. Not just a child, but a life built on love, resilience, and justice. The city glimmered below, indifferent to their triumphs and scars. But Amara no longer felt like an outsider in its vastness. She and Leo had faced the storm, Victoria's cruelty, Thorne's vendetta, their own doubts, and emerged stronger. The legacy they were building wasn't bound by wealth or name, but by the unbreakable bond they'd forged. As the jazz record spun its final notes, Amara leaned into Leo, her heart steady. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, a family redefined by courage and love. Thank you for joining Amara, Leo, and Victoria on this journey of love, resilience, and redemption. Their story reminds us that true strength lies in facing challenges together, defying prejudice, and building a legacy rooted in justice and unity. What did you think of their fight? How did Amara's courage or Victoria's transformation resonate with you? Share your thoughts. I'd love to hear them. Until our next story, stay inspired and keep fighting for what matters.